It's important to note that Henry was fully on board with the creative decisions being made at this time. And I know this is a bit of a taboo subject because it seems like this means that he was not happy with Zack Snyder. It means that he's almost sort of biting the hand that feeds, right? Because Zack Snyder's Man of Steel is what brought Henry to the Superman dance. So how could he speak ill of Zack Snyder's vision? I know it's a tough pill to swallow for some fans. And listen, I'm not saying that he doesn't have love and respect for Zack and that they haven't shown it since. He'll probably always have love and respect for Zack Snyder. But some of these quotes I'm about to read to you in the lead up to the theatrical release of Justice League are going to make very clear what Henry thought needed to happen and how precisely on board he was with what was going on. So first things first, here's a quote from October of 2017. He said, "Even if Marvel didn't exist, we'd struggle. There was a style they were going for, an attempt to be different and look at things from a slightly different perspective, which hasn't necessarily worked. Yes, it has made money, but it has not been a critical success. It hasn't given everyone that sensation which superheroes should give the viewer." You hear that? You hear that? There was a style they were going for that hasn't necessarily worked. Who is the they? He's talking about Snyder and company, the people who made BVS and had charted the course for these next few movies that were coming out. Then he goes on to say, "I feel like now the right mistakes have been made and they haven't been pandered to. And we can start telling the stories in the way they need to be told. It is even better to come back from a mistake or stylistic error into the correct vein because it will make it seem that much stronger. Wonder Woman was the first step in the right direction." And you notice he's saying that in October because, yes, in June of that year, Wonder Woman came out, and that was not a Zack Snyder movie. But it was a character that had been introduced in a Zack Snyder movie. And yet that movie was the first of the DCEU films to actually be a success across the board. It was the first one. Its opening exceeded box office expectations. The critical response was overwhelmingly positive. The fan response was overwhelmingly positive. And by the end of it, everyone seemed to want more Wonder Woman. It was all the things that hadn't happened after Man of Steel. It was all the things that hadn't happened after Batman versus Superman. They had happened after Wonder Woman. And that was a project that the new creative leadership had had a hand in forming. You know, that was where Jeff Johns let Patty Jenkins have more creative license and basically let her retcon this idea that Wonder Woman abandoned humanity for 100 years, as Zack Snyder had claimed that she had in BVS. Like, this was a movie where the creators were allowed to sort of distance themselves from decisions made by Snyder, and it paid off royally. Wonder Woman was a smash hit, and it made suddenly everyone think, okay, maybe DC can be okay here. But let's continue with Henry's comments, because he would also say, regarding the Superman that we were going to be seeing in this Justice League movie, he said, "He's definitely different from previous incarnations. I feel like this is the natural progression from the end of Man of Steel into what he is now. This is a rebirth of the character. To coin the DC Comics franchise right now, it's a refresh. This movie highlights the qualities of Superman that exist in the comics. That's something I've always been very keen to highlight in the character. This rebirth provided the opportunity for me to play those characteristics." So mind you, this is him post-reshoots, knowing what this Superman that we're all about to see in theaters is going to be. And he's all thumbs up. 2 thumbs gloriously held high. He also said, I think there's an opportunity for these heroes to be represented in a way in which everyone can access. It should be funny. You should be able to take your kids to it. I've always enjoyed the traditional, very classic view on Superman in the comic books. I think there's an enormous complexity to that character. I know when I was working with Joss, he and I saw eye to eye on some of the aspects of Superman. That paragon of hope, that ideal, that wonderful feeling of, oh, good, Superman's here. I have also developed a very personal and protective relationship over this character, and it was just lovely to have the opportunity to smile and feel good. Isn't that interesting? Like, I'm sorry to the Snyder fans of the world, to the people who see that and did not want to be reminded that Henry said that. But you have to understand that he knew what BVS did. He knew that this way that he had been represented so far was doing him no favors. And he was fully on board with basically moving on from Snyder's vision and completing the pivot that Joss Whedon's Justice League was trying to get us to, so that he could continue on as Superman in a more traditional, more classic vein.